OLED displays are all of the rage, particularly for their fast response rates, excellent color, great wide color gamuts, and the visual pop that you would only get with an OLED display, an organic LED display. So if we take that, put it into a laptop, this being the ASUS ProArt Studiobook 16, can we then achieve a creator's laptop, which is meant for artists and creators and graphics work, also double up as a great gaming laptop or perhaps an all-around laptop that can replace your desktop? Well, in this video, we're going to find out. So let's jump right into it. Let's take a brief look at the ports on offer here in this ProArt Studiobook 16. So let's begin with the left-hand side. On the left-hand side of the device, we're graced with a full-sized SD card reader. We'll talk more about that in the SD card section for artists and the actual transfer speeds. This is a headphone microphone combo jack, and we have a USB Type A port. We'll talk about the port selection here in the spec section in just a moment. We have some venting here for exhaust. The rear of the device is fairly light, but we've got a USB 2.5 gigabit Ethernet port here. Thank you very much for that for creators. If you're moving lots of content off to hard drives, off of NAS storage drives, this is absolutely essential. We have a barrel type 240 watt adapter power port here, and we've got HDMI 2.1 port here on board with the RTX 4070, and just some venting for exhaust. Very small outputs actually for exhaust on this particular device. And finally, on the right hand side, we've got a traditional Kensington lock port, some more exhausting for the fans and the heat here. We've got another USB Type 3.2 Type A port, and we've got two Thunderbolt 4 ports. I don't like the way that ASUS does this port placement by having everything shoved into the front of the device, but furthermore, even having all of these devices or these ports collected together. It would be nice to have one on either side of the device. Now, I know that means you have to go with specific motherboard designs to get that, but that's something that would be absolutely essential. If you're a creator, having everything dangling off your right-hand side, and if you're right-handed, which is most of us, is quite annoying. You'd have to get some sort of angled cables here for USB Type-C to make sure that you're not blocking your mouse hand or interfering as you work. And finally, on the bottom of this device, we can see here that there's some, heat pipes going across. I believe there may be one loop here for the GPU, one here for the CPU, and then one shared larger heat pipe between the two devices perhaps. So there is no vapor chamber in this device because this only comes with a maximum of a 4070 graphics offering. There is no 4080 or 4090 model offered in the ProArt Studiobook 16. And in my opinion, I think that's a missed opportunity because if you're doing lots of creative work, lots of video editing work, you need that extra horsepower and particularly that extra VRAM for rendering. If you're doing 3D work, you want to have that extra RAM for rendering and all of your live production workflow. So missed opportunity there, I believe, with the Studiobook. So it's a little bit confusing who their actually targeted audience is, considering some of the choices that ASUS has made on this particular device. The the deck of this device here is actually very nice. We've got a nice soft touch material here. I like the way that they've done the keyboard, fully fleshed out. They filled up the device nicely. And if you look at the right hand side, well done. They've got equal sized keys. The size and pitch of each key is equal. So you're not getting from the QWERTY section of the keyboard over to the numpad and missing some keys. However, that said, a numpad is usually 4 columns, and they've abbreviated by trimming it down to 3 columns in order to get this equal key sizing in this device. I personally prefer this over having a squished numpad and the 4 columns, or even not having, most preferred would be not to have this at all, because I don't know how many creators actually use a numpad while they're working and editing. They usually have some sort of USB device, a jog dial, some sort of editing controller to be able to work. But again, another intended miss in terms of their targeted audience. One nice thing that ASUS does have on this particular device, and it's very unique, I don't think any other device has something like this, is this control dial. And we'll be talking about what this control dial does specifically a little bit later, particularly how it actually functions for creators and how you can actually map your creative workflow to this. And I'll demonstrate that using DaVinci Resolve and doing some editing on this particular review. So you'll see a little bit of inception here as we demonstrate how this control dial can work. Now, that said, we have a very nice trackpad here. It's a glass surface. It's very smooth. So, doing gestures on this is very, very good. Haven't had any issues with accidental touches or any issues of that sort. It works quite well. I'll give you a little bit of a feel of the keyboard itself. So just pause a moment here and we'll do a little bit of a quick typing test. Just to make a few comments here about this particular keyboard, it's actually very nice. And when I took it out of the box and with the initial touch type feel, I thought this was some sort of a mechanical keyboard and not a membrane keyboard at all. It's actually very, very well tuned. It's very light. You have good tactility, and there's a nice tactile, satisfying sound when you type on this particular keyboard, unlike what I saw just from even the Legion 9i. The Legion 9i, of course, has those smiley keys, that signature Lenovo keyboard, but they were a little bit stiff for my particular liking. So if you like a keyboard that's lighter, it's very easy to touch. As you can see here, I'm over 100 words per minute on this particular keyboard. I have no qualms about this keyboard whatsoever. Love the way that they did the layout, 3 columns here, full-size numpad, and excellent backlight. There's 3 stages here: off, low, medium, and high. At high, it starts to become visible on the light because I've got a lot of light overhead, but this keyboard, you should not have any complaints whatsoever. The full-sized SD Express 7.0 card reader included on the ProArt Studiobook 16 performs well, as we demonstrate here, copying about 476 photos off of an SDXC card, starts at around 200 megabytes per second plus, and quickly settles to around 140 megabytes, which is the rated speed for this particular type of SD card. And under 1 minute, we can copy about 7 gigabytes of data. So well done. And one other thing to note about that is the SD Express card does not go in all the way, but sticks out about maybe a third. So just keep that in mind if you're going to be carrying this around or leave the device and the card inserted in the device. Looking at the CPU performance from the ProArt Studiobook 16, we get some very nice scores right in line with the 13980HX I've tested in the ASUS ROG Strix G18. So nice to see that the top core part indeed holds up with performance in this thinner and lighter, much smaller notebook performance. There is an exception, however, in the single core scores in Cinebench, which falls kind of in line with the 13500H, which is only a 14 core part. It's a little bit disappointing there, and the PC Mark 10 also reflects that, but otherwise you've got full performance on board. Alright, a few words about this particular display. So as you can see here, this is an OLED display. It means it has a glass surface on top, and as a result, you can see the reflection from the actual keyboard backlight. If I turn this off, you'll see here that that reflection is reduced. However, any ambient light in the room also affects the clarity of this display. So if you have a lot of backlight behind you, you'll have some issues with actually working on this display comfortably. That said, this is a 500 nits display. ASUS states that in HDR mode, it can go up to 550 nits. In addition, this is also a touch display, which means if you're using something like Paint or if you're an artist and a pen comes included in the box, we'll test that in a little bit later section. But you can go here and you can actually use your screen, as a device for painting, touching, artist work, whatever. It's actually quite responsive as well. If you go to a larger size, for example, there's no perceptible lag as far as I can see. I don't know if that's due to the display, the OLED display tech itself, that they've got a very nice digitizer interface here, which really makes this display responsive. Excellent for doing calligraphy work, for example. And aside from that, one more thing I'd like to mention about the display, because this display is this is a creator device, you also have the option here to toggle drivers. And if you go into your GeForce experience once you've signed in, unfortunately they make you sign into that. Once you're signed in, however, you have the option to choose between a game ready driver or a studio driver. By default, being a creator device, this comes installed with the studio driver, but it's very easy with a quick toggle in the GeForce experience, and check for updates. You'll be pulling in the latest game ready driver and you're off gaming. And finally, a few caveats to mention about this particular display. Even according to ASUS's official specs, it does not denote that this is an advanced Optimus laptop device, or that this is a G-Sync display, or any other variable refresh rate of that sort for this particular display. Now, that may be due to the fact that this is an LCD or an OLED panel and not an LCD panel, so that's unnecessary. However, there's no mention of that, and I did see some screen tearing happen in games while gameplay, particularly fast rate games such as Doom Eternal, and even a little bit in certain areas of Assassin's Creed Mirage. So that, I think, is a little bit of a detriment here. If you plan to use this as a gaming first device, be warned that you're not going to have that G-Sync display there. However, this is also a glossy display I've mentioned, so there's a little bit of an issue with the screen reflections. But that said, this is a 120 Hz refresh rate native display at 3.2K by 2K, so no issues with the resolution and sharpness there. And the brightness is pretty good at 500 nits, although I believe, having just looked at a mini LED display that was capable of 1200 nits, this seems dull by comparison. But compared to most average laptops that you see with 300, 350, or even 400 nits of display brightness, you're going to love this display. If you don't like glossy displays or touch displays or OLED displays because you prefer the flat matte look that you get with a traditional LCD display, then you should be looking elsewhere. ASUS is generous enough to include an ASUS Pen 2.0 in the box. This one has 4,000 levels of pressure sensitivity. And if we look at the included pen, that's included generously thanks to ASUS. We have here 2 buttons on the lid or on the body of the pen. We have a button up top here. And we have a slide out mechanism here that reveals a hidden USB Type-C port for charging with the included USB Type-C to Type-C charging cable. And with the cable attached like so, you plug it into the right hand side of the device or any USB Type-C port for charging the pen. Once the pen is charged, in order to pair, you press the button on the end of the device here in order to activate Bluetooth pairing mode, which means you get a blinking blue light here. Then head over on your device to Bluetooth control panel and click add Bluetooth device, add device here, Bluetooth, and we should be able to see ASUS Pen. Select ASUS Pen and you should be able to pair. Once the device is paired, you'll see that the light changes from blue blinking to a solid white light, and then the light dissipates. So now we have access to using the Bluetooth pen. So once we have it, it's actually quite smooth and it actually works quite well. So if I increase the size here so you can see, it actually works quite well. Perhaps tilting it up a little, there we go. So I can write without any issues. And because it keeps up with the pen very fast, I can draw as fast as I want. There's no lag whatsoever. And this is the beautiful thing about combining OLED with a pen like this. You have the levels of pressure sensitivity, you have the low energy Bluetooth connection, you have long battery life on this pen, plus you have the OLED display with a very low refresh rate, less than 1 millisecond, which means your basically inputs are instantaneous and they reflect on the screen as such. And these buttons are of course configurable as well, but there does not seem to be any additional software that's provided either through the Creator Hub for the pen specifically. So I'm assuming you have to map within the application that you're interested in using with the ASUS pen. To get the ASUS dial working, first you'll need to hop into ProArt Creator Hub, click on the Process and Start to Update Now button, which will take you over to the Microsoft Store to download the free ASUS Dial and Control Panel app. Once this is downloaded, you'll then have access to be able to configure and also set some of the default behaviors and which apps can be used with the dial. That said, once you have it enabled, one such example here is Microsoft Edge. With this, you'll see here that as you press the dial, you get a few different options. You can cycle through tabs, zoom the window in and out, and also control YouTube playback and subtitles, etc. But as you can see here, pressing it and selecting the cycle through tabs option allows you to just rotate the dial to cycle through the different tabs, which is akin to the Alt tab or the Control tab shortcut in your actual browser. So some handy features there, but there's a lot of configuration required and it's a very versatile tool. However, configuration for a tool such as the GIMP, which I spent an hour or so on, was not quite as easy to do. Nonetheless, thanks ASUS for being innovative and at least trying something new. Storage on the ProArt Studiobook is provided in the form of a PCIe Gen 4 SSD of the 1 terabyte capacity from Samsung. So nice to see a very nice offering there. There's 2 onboard slots. One is populated with this drive. There is an additional PCIe Gen 4 slot for up to a 4 terabyte capacity expansion in each slot for a total of 8 terabytes on this device. And if you look at the read and write speeds, we're getting very, very good figures here, reaching the theoretical maximum of 7,000 megabytes per second on the read speed. So really maxing out that PCIe Gen 4 interface. For communications, the ProArt Studiobook 16 is equipped with a Wi-Fi 6E adapter. It's the Intel AX211 variety, which is one of the more stable Wi-Fi cards that I've tested in the last year or so. Also included is Bluetooth 5.3 with low energy support, which means your battery life should last longer and your stable connection should be more stable. Also included is a 2.5 gigabit Ethernet for quick transfers and moving lots of data from and to this device for content creators and for additional creator workloads. No complaints in the communications department on the ProArt Studiobook. The Studiobook 16 uses a 90 watt-hours battery that is very common amongst many ASUS devices, both of the 16-inch and even higher varieties. That said, there is a 240 watt AC adapter that's included. That's a barrel plug, but there is also an option to charge from either of the 2 Thunderbolt 4 ports provided using a USB Type-C charger of 140 watts output. So that should be able to get you there in a pinch. As for battery life itself, we'll see about roughly 3 to 4 hours of battery life if you're pushing this thing a little hard, you won't even be able to hit 3 hours. But with, moderate use, moderate to heavy use, you should be able to hit about 3.5, perhaps even 4 hours, depending on your use case, and with that OLED display. This is a test of the Full HD 1080p webcam that's built into the ProArt Studiobook 16. Also included IR support for Windows Hello, and you have a built-in shortcut here on the keyboard, toggling F11 will disable the webcam like so, and toggling it again will bring your camera back to life. Nice to have a little bit of a neat privacy shutter here, so thanks ASUS for including that. Also included are array microphones, so you should get some fairly good noise isolation in your environment using the built-in array microphones. Let me know what you think of the picture and audio quality in the comments below. And here's a quick look at some of the synthetic benchmarks performed on this ProArt Studiobook. All of the testing was done with, again, switching from the studio driver over to the game-ready drivers, and with the native resolution of the display wherever applicable, 3.2K by 2K. But for some of these 3D Mark results, the testing was done, at 3.2K by 2K if applicable. But some of the tests may have been run at 2560 by 1600 or 2560 by 1440p, depending on what the presets were available for each particular benchmark. You can look at some of these scores here. It's pretty respectable. If you compare these to the results online, you'll see that it's pretty much on par for the other 4070 equipped laptops, despite the claims of the 130 watt TGP here. You're only going to see about 80 to 90 watts of performance during gaming, and also that's pretty much the story of the 4070 here throughout this year of 2023, with all of these synthetic benchmarks as well as gaming benchmarks. Now, there is one exception though for this case, and that is when we're running FurMark benchmark. So this benchmark, I believe, because it's very, very GPU dependent, so that means the CPU stays very low and it's able to throttle the wattage on the CPU all the way down to 20. It is able to really push that GPU up to that 130 watts, and I think that may be the restriction here. The overall power budget is constraining the GPU from stretching its legs and hitting all the way up to that 130 watt target. But as you can see here in this little snapshot, having run the FurMark benchmark for over an hour, it was able to indeed hit 132 watts. And the temperatures looked not too bad, 80 degrees on that CPU and 83 degrees on that GPU. Looking at some gaming benchmarks from the ProArt Studiobook 16, we start to see a trend here. The testing was performed at the native 3.2K by 2K resolution with the latest game-ready drivers versus the studio drivers which ship by default on this laptop since it's a creator device, and the highest preset in each of the games tested was selected, and if available, any DLSS or any other frame generation tech or any other basically quality tech was such as FSR2 was engaged, and all of testing was done in full performance mode on this device in using the ProArt Creator Hub. That said, if we see here, there's a trend that starts to form from all these benchmarks at the native resolution of this display and at the highest presets in many of these games. The minimum and 1% low averages are so low that you get very stuttery gameplay. Despite the 130 watts max TGP claims on that 4070, the story is still pretty much what it was earlier this year, that you see actual gaming performance anywhere between 90 to 100 watts at much higher resolutions beyond 1920 by 1200 or 1080p, and some games are playable at 1440p or 1600p, but despite that, you're going to get a lot of stutters. There's going to be jitter, there's going to be texture pop-in due to the 8GB RAM limitation as well. That means, yes, you can game, but you'll have to make sure that you play at lower resolutions, particularly around 1080p. And if we look here at two particular games, Assassin's Creed Mirage, if we lower the resolution from the native 3.2K by 2K to 1600p or around 1440p, we still see very low 1% averages and minimums, but our average does start to climb, which means you'll get a little bit more stable gameplay, but it's still nowhere what we'd expect. And at 1080p or rather 1200p, we start to see that the average frame rate climbs a little bit further, making the game a little bit more playable. Still very low averages for the 1%, and minimums are far too low to have really smooth gameplay. In another example here, Cyberpunk 2077 Phantom Liberty, with the latest 2.01 updates at 1600p, our average starts to get a little bit better, but our 1% lows are still even below the 30 FPS threshold for what I think would be considered basic, standard gameplay. And even at 1200p, we're barely starting to hit that 31% or 31 frames per second on the 1% low and 63 average frames per second. So if you're looking for a gaming GPU and a gaming laptop first and foremost, this unfortunately is not going to be your best bet due to that 4070, which has restrictions on the wattage, around 90 to 100 watts during the gaming experience. It is also limited with 8 gigabytes of VRAM. In some games, you'll start to hit that, particularly at higher resolutions, 1600p and above, in this case 3.2K by 2K on the native resolution of this display. And also keep in mind that because of the lows on the 4070, you're going to have some stuttery gameplay. And finally, I want to show off here one thing, which is with DaVinci Resolve and editing a 4K 60 FPS HDR video with that 8 gigabytes of RAM and that 4070. It's a little bit choppy as you pan through the timeline, a little stuttery. You're not getting smooth tracking as you pan through. And considering that I've got the render resolution here reduced to a quarter, if you leave it to the full resolutions, which means you're tracking along the timeline at each frame being 4K 60 in HDR, then it becomes a little bit more choppy. And I think this is where there's another miss with the intended target audience here for this particular laptop. If ASUS was targeting creators, he should have given us at least a 4080 or a 4090, because we know the performance difference, even in games, and I'm sure that translates to creator workloads as well, is 50% and up, considering from the 4070 just up to that 4080. So 4070 is okay for light gaming and I think lower end budget oriented laptops. But if you're looking at a creator oriented device and you're serious about video content production or any graphics or any creator workloads, you need that power that comes with that 48 and of course additional 4 gigs of VRAM there. So that said though, the rendering output is pretty good. For example, if we mark a quick clip here, we'll mark it from here 8 seconds to about, let's see, maybe 2 minutes or so, and we render this clip in place. I'll show you what the output speed is from the 4070 when we're rendering. We're rendering an MP4 at using the H.264 and a high encoding profile, which means we're going to get 4K 60 HDR output. Let's select the folder here and we'll look at how the speed is for the output here. So the 4070, you know, it's not bad. If you're outputting, you can certainly get all your workflow done. If you reduce the resolution, use proxy clips, and make sure that you give lots of time for output, you should have no problems being able to get your workflow done here. However, if you want something that really is cutting edge and at the prices that I believe ASUS is charging for this, you know, you can get an ASUS or not an ASUS, a Dell or a Lenovo or even an ASUS laptop on sale with the 4070 for about half the price. So the value proposition really isn't there, and that's where I want to conclude here. I think there's a few different misses here in terms of the intended targeted audience. You know, why do we not have control over fan profiles and additional customization in the ProArt Hub? One, for example. There's still a split between, there's a My ASUS app, which is used to do updates and provide software updates to this laptop. However, we use ProArt Creator Hub to switch between the different modes. There isn't a keyboard shortcut for toggling through the performance modes as far as I understand. It is nice, however, that they've included a pen. Thank you very much for that. And it is nice that we've got the top-end CPU from Intel 13th generation Raptor Lake this year in this device. The upgradable DIMMs, which means you can swap out the RAM at a later time, is also fantastic and very welcome. Thank you for that, ASUS, with a creator-oriented thin and light device. The keyboard layout is fantastic. This OLED screen is absolutely gorgeous, and being that it is a touch display means you can make well use of that pen that comes bundled with this device. That would be another $100 or $150 or so if you were to go and buy that off market, I am sure, or an equivalent pen. So that said, gaming on here is pretty fantastic. You can see with the 4070 you can game in pretty much every game there, but at the native resolution it starts to stutter. Of course, that isn't the intended target resolution for the 4070. If you stick to 1440p or 1080p even, you should be able to get pretty playable and fantastic game frame rates from this device. Do keep in mind though that 4070 suffers from very low 1% low frame and minimum frame rates, so you're going to get stuttery and juddery gameplay at times. If you can live with that, or if you can drop the settings down from ultra or the highest preset in your game down to a medium or even a high, then you may be able to get a better gameplay experience from this laptop. And swapping over from the game ready drivers and the studio driver is also fantastic to be able to do your creator workloads as well as the gaming modes. So overall, a very nice laptop. It's very, very well equipped. This is very pleasant. but I think the price isn't right. At the right price, this thing would move a ton, and I think it should be about $1,000 less than where it's currently priced. At $3,500 Canadian, I think the value proposition simply isn't there, because we're now starting to head into the holiday season and see 4070 equipped laptops for well under $2,000. So given that it has an OLED 120 Hz display, a touch display, comes bundled with a pen, got the highest end CPU this year, and a 4070, which is somewhere mid-range in the stack for GPUs for 2023 in the 4000 generation, should be about $2,500 to maybe $2,600 at most. So that's all I have to say about this laptop. I hope you enjoyed my coverage. I spent a lot of time and made a lot of effort here, so I appreciate subscribes to my channel. Please share this content if you like it or if you found it helpful, and also, help spread the word by subscribing, turning on the notifications. I will be doing more live streams of gameplays as well on my channel, so please stay tuned for that. And thanks very much for watching. We'll see you in the next video.